You're listening to the podcast on jasonsolomons.com, and I'm joined by Kent Jones, filmmaker and film programmer, head of the New York Film Festival, but he's all now turned documentary maker with the brilliant Hitchcock Truffaut. Kent, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your film as well, which is obviously for film geeks, it's kind of paradise, but I think it's more than that as well. It's kind of a gripping interview between Francois Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock, and I think it kind of is one of those. There's quite a sort of genre of a kind of head-to-heads that we had Frost Nixon, and we had the one with what was the one with Gore Vidal recently?
Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley.
William Buckley, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley. Or
yeah,
Mailer?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we had that one too. I'm glad we've done our research. But it's kind of gripping. It's kind of like they kind of raise each other's game, like Borg and McEnroe. You know what I mean? They kind of raise each other's game.
I see what you mean. It's an interesting encounter because Truffaut was in America doing promotion for Jules and Jim, and he would be confronted and sitting in a room with all these American journalists, and they would say, "Who are the filmmakers that have influenced you?" And when Truffaut said Alfred Hitchcock, people would look at him like he had just gone out of his mind,
right?
And, needed to be taken to Bellevue. And I mean, he said to Helen Scott, who was translating for him and running the French film office in New York at the time, "Listen, we have to do something about this. I want to do a book." And that's
he himself was shocked that people didn't take Hitchcock as seriously as he did.
Absolutely shocked.
I mean, would it be the equivalent of someone coming to the New York Film Festival and saying, "Yeah, I'm a big Michael Bay fan"? I mean, or is there something?
Yeah, except that happens. So I don't. I mean, I have these ridiculous conversations with people about. I remember I was talking to a cinephile once who was saying, "Well, I think Spielberg really finally in the end is much less talented than Michael Bay." And I was like, I don't know what side of the bed you woke up on this morning or what you ate last night, but you're just wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a sort of factually provable.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
But at least with Hitchcock and Truffaut, we know we're in the hands of greats. I mean, their reputations are kind of signed and sealed because they're no longer extant as filmmakers, but they made films that have influenced generations. Truffaut with Quatre Cents Coups, 400 Blows, Jules et Jim, Day for Night, whatever you want to say. And Hitchcock with his Rafa films, which started here in London and went on to kind of dominate Hollywood. He was a big. Is the problem with Hitchcock that he had hits? Was that the problem?
Yeah. I mean, that's still the problem. People have the same kind of problem with Scorsese, don't they? I think that whenever people are instantly suspicious of popular success, I guess that it's then when someone dies, suddenly everybody remembers how great they are.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very, very common thing. In Hitchcock's case, of course, you had the beginning of what was in France called the politique des auteurs, and then in America, Andrew Sarris turned it into the auteur theory. And it's now just plain old auteurism. But the thing is that was still kind of like bubbling to the surface at that point.
Right. So we're talking 1961,
62.
The interview happened.
62.
So the Cahiers had done their kind of auteur theory.
The Cahiers had done their auteur theory thing,
but not everyone was aware of it yet.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think that everybody's an auteur.
Yeah. Congratulations. You're now an auteur.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Everybody's an auteur. It's assumed that every film, people are comfortable saying the word director. It doesn't matter where you are. That just wasn't always true. It's, these things often take a long time to bubble to the surface and to become concretized. And I think that in those days, Hitchcock was just sort of seen as a guy who delivered a nice Saturday evening out. That was the popular idea. He was also one of the few film directors in the world who was a celebrity. So he'd made himself a brand name. And that was a nice way of protecting himself, protecting his own artistic integrity.
At the time, Hitchcock, as you say, was phenomenally popular, even though he was making, I suppose, the ultimate indie movie in Psycho that was low budget and then was a big success. It's a kind of a good model, and it's a model that Godard and Truffaut themselves followed as well, because Abu de Soufre was a huge hit eventually as well. But was there a case that old studio system had kind of gone, so the auteurs that the Cahiers were kind of revisiting, the Anthony Manns, the John Fords, all of those kind of directors who hadn't quite got their dues maybe. Was there the Hitchcock was the kind of only guy that they were doing that to in the current day, or had they reassessed other cultural reputations?
I think it's for them a matter of, look, these were young guys. I mean, they were at the beginning of the 50s, they were all in their late teens, early 20s, and suddenly all these movies that had been kept out of France during the occupation flooded into the country. No one had seen Citizen Kane until after the war. And they had, this remarkable man, Andre Bazin, the Godfather. I think that this beautiful film culture built around, in France, Jean Cocteau, Robert Bresson, Jean Renoir, as opposed to other people like Claude Autant-Lara, the traditional quality.
Yeah, because they had their studios, so the René Clairs as well.
Yeah, and they needed something to fight against, to define themselves against. Those films are, finally, not that bad.
Yeah, now they're being reassessed by the Olivier Assayas of the world who feature in your film.
Sure, but that's not the point. The point is that you always need to define yourself against something, against some kind of orthodoxy. So that's what they did. And as they were doing it, they saw in American cinema something that stood as a counterexample. And so, there were people like Frank Tashlin, that Godard paid a lot of attention to, Nicholas Ray, there was Anthony Mann, there was Douglas Sirk to a slightly lesser extent. And then, of course, Hitchcock was, one of the great masters for them.
Did the interview benefit Hitchcock's reputation at the time? Because it sort of happened in 1962, and famously, sort of Hitchcock's works after The Birds sort of fell away a bit. There weren't that many of them due to ill health and age, etc. Did it help his reputation at the time, or is it now that the sort of benefits of that book, 2 or 3 generations later, have really come to the fore? Because everyone's got that book now.
Yeah, sure.
Was it a hit book at the time?
It's gone through so many printings, I wouldn't even know. I mean, it came out in France in '66, and in the UK and the United States.
Wow,
in
it took him that long to put on.
Oh yeah, sure. No, he did 2 other interviews with him that I don't know where the tapes to those are.
Right, because that's
after Marnie and Torn Curtain.
Oh, he did. All right, so he kind of referenced those because they go through each film. Do they go through each film by film?
Yeah, every film. I mean, some of them are more difficult to see than others
because it's very well planned, isn't it? As a book, I mean, it's not the interview that you just sort of turn up and just do and say, Well,
I mean, people take it for granted now that if you're going to do something like this, you can have instant access. It's like Paul Schrader says in my movie. Everyone has access to absolutely everything, indiscriminate access. But back in those days, I mean, to see every single film by Hitchcock was no mean feat. I mean, Truffaut came to the BFI, and
because I was going to say it's quite difficult. Because when the BFI we kind of put remastered all the silent movies in time for the Olympics in 2012. That was kind of a hard work. Finding the Manxman was hard. The Ivan Novello movie, The Lodger, was difficult to put together. And Nitin Sawhney did new scores for it. We struggled to get the right prints and kind of and clean up those negatives. So I don't know what state Truffaut must have found some of them in.
Well, I mean, you can see from the reproductions in the book that he found some in not such a great state. You can tell because he did frame enlargements.
Yeah.
But the book is so beautifully planned. It's actually, and the book is actually edited for fleetness. It's almost like watching one of Truffaut's films.
Because I mean, he treated it almost like a movie. I mean, it would take 4 years to make it, really.
Yeah, it's something that Olivier Assayas says in my film. He says, it's not just Truffaut did a book about Hitchcock. It's something much more than that. And I mean, as Rick Linklater pointed out, I didn't wind up using this in the film, but he said something that's quite accurate. He put as much energy as you would put into 2 films at the height of his career.
Yes.
I mean, it's astonishing.
Yeah. Although we're talking about it still, so obviously it really worked. And, obviously the filmmaking process always intrigued Truffaut. I mean, he made Day for Night, which is a movie about making movies. So it was something that the process was already there, I think, for him. And he was a film critic before making Jules et Jim and making the 400 Blows. So
this is a guy who was extremely dynamic and who had a lot of energy, and you can feel all the energy in his movies, and you can feel it in that book. And so the movies are good, and so is the book.
Yeah.
I love Fahrenheit 451.
Yes, well, yeah, that's a film about books, in a way.
Yep.
I'm going to sort of take the sort of difficult question, but for you, in your movie of the book, you concentrate quite a lot on Vertigo. You've got brilliant kind of talk. Scorsese takes us through Vertigo brilliantly in the way only he can. Did you have a favourite Hitchcock that you wanted to get in there, that you wanted to ask your stellar lineup of directors about? Have you got a favourite Hitchcock? Because I knew Truffaut had his favourites.
He did. He had Rear Window and Notorious. I really feel that Hitchcock's, I would say the only other body of work close to it is Ozu's. The 2 of them, those are the 2 greatest bodies of work in movies.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that...
Better than Scorsese, better than Woody Allen in terms of...
Well, I mean in terms of 2 people who are working under studio conditions and who have such massive bodies of work. I mean, there are other people with smaller bodies of work that are great. Nowadays it's impossible to do that much work. But, for someone who produced that many films... None of them are in second gear. None of them.
It's true.
You cannot say that of every film by John Ford. You cannot say that of every film by Howard Hawks. but you can absolutely say that of every film by Alfred Hitchcock.
There are 40 of them.
Yeah, and I mean, even the ones that are less, Waltz is from Vienna, his least favorite film, that's a pretty good movie.
Did you have a model for this in a way? Because the model is the book, which has inspired many filmmaker conversation books, from Mike Lee to that famous series of filmmakers on filmmakers. Did you have a model as a filmmaker yourself of this documentary? Because it's kind of, I haven't seen one quite like this, even though I mentioned those conversation movies before.
I don't want to make too big a deal out of this, but I didn't have a model film in mind at all. But what I did have in mind was the kind of energy that I felt at the beginning of The Social Network, the sequence where he's putting the website together and there's cutting back and forth between, that and the party and the people in the dorm rooms, and stuff like that. And Fincher's got like 97 balls spinning in the air at the same time. And there are shots that last about, 10 frames and you remember them. And that's what I wanted to do. With Fincher, whenever I've spoken to him about films from the past, it's been about films from the 70s. He's talking about Hal Ashby, he's talking about Chinatown, he's talking about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, every once in a while about John Huston. So when I asked him, I was absolutely prepared for him to say, no, I really don't have much of a feeling for Hitchcock. And, I said, do you know the book? And so he said, just a little bit. I just read it a couple hundred times when I was a kid. So he was really, and I really love his point of view because it's fresh. It's very different. It's not, and when I say fresh, I mean it's quite different from the approach to film history that we're used to. He's got a very irreverent approach, but he also is passionate about people knowing the basics of filmmaking and cutting through the mystique.
Well, that's what comes through your film, a great passion, your own passion for it, but also your filmmakers that you get in your movie, those great names, their passion for it as well. And I love the fact that it's so personal as well. They talk about finding the print and the first time they saw it as well. And that really opens up, as critics for both of us, that really opens up, I think, your film. You can't just have a dry conversation about these things.
I wasn't
so for Hitchcock Truffaut, many thanks. Kent Jones, lovely to have you on the show. Good luck with the next New York Film Festival. I suppose you've got to do the rounds, Berlin, Canada,
looking at stuff now,
collecting stuff, and I wish you the best for your next edition, and I wish you the best for Hitchcock Truffaut as it opens in the UK. Thanks for coming.
Jason. Thank you.